Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the VIBE Daily Chat Group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
All right, welcome back to the VIBEZ Daily Podcast. It is day 78 of our Devoted series. We have been moving through the Bible this year, reading it from cover to cover, going through the entire Bible, starting at Genesis, and now we are picking up here in 1 Samuel today. But just before we get into that, I just want to remind you again, please read along with us. There is a plan available to you, but you can follow along and do the reading. We're not going to cover everything that's in this book, and so it's still important that you take time to read it and get an idea of what it includes. But this week, I am excited to be joined by my wife, Victoria, my friend Rob, who is here with us this week, and so excited to have them join us in this conversation on the book of 1 Samuel. As we do every week, we'd love to start with a quick Bible-related question, and so we want to open it up in that way. And this week's question is, do you have a favorite song that is based on Scripture? If so, what is it, and what Scripture is it referring to?
I feel like y'all both looked at me. Okay, I'll go.
Okay.
Like, so of course my favorite song, I think you already know what it's gonna be. Tasha Cobbs and Kier Sheard is Your Spirit. And so that is on was it Zechariah or Zephaniah? Zechariah?
Yeah,
Zechariah chapter
Going for
4,
the vocals.
verse 6.
Yeah, I like going any further than that. That's not all you're gonna get.
Yeah, Zechariah chapter 4, verse 6. I had to look it up because I actually know where it came from. But
Okay.
Yeah.
that's mine.
What does it say?
Okay, I'm sorry. Let me just go to the text. But in the song it says, not by might, not by power, but by your spirit, Lord, send your spirit. And so it's pretty much the Lord saying that you're not going to go by your own might or your own power, but it's going to be my spirit.
Okay.
And that's going to be the reason why you succeed.
Good
Okay.
one.
Okay.
What about you, man?
This is a throwback. Byron Cage.
Okay.
I want to make sure I get the song right. Byron Cage, Thou Art a Shield for Me. It is based off Psalms 3. Yep. That whole album smack, by the way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yo, I do wish I could sing, because we'd have choir rehearsal right now.
So,
Choir practice. That is a good one.
yeah.
A little rusty.
That is a good one.
Yeah. See, me and my siblings, we had a group back in the day.
Oh.
So I'm gonna talk about church hurt for a minute. I'm gonna share this with them. They kicked me out the group. They said I wasn't taking it serious enough. And so our manager, which was our mom, she she's kind of stayed out of it. But and so I think this was the summer. Like, I think that this album dropped.
Okay.
And I was in my feelings.
Got you.
I got one of them.
Yeah. But it's all good though. It's all good. You know, they tried to bring the group back like last Sunday. I told them nah. But yeah, that song, it gets me throughout. You can put it on and it just takes me there. And really because it just kind of reminds me that like God is like my strength.
Yeah.
And he will like hold my head up in a time like where I feel like that the world is on me, like he guides me.
Yeah.
And just kind of remind me that like, yo, like I'm God.
Yeah.
Like I can do any and everything. You just gotta really just believe it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Tell me, which psalm is that again? You said
Songs 3, chapter 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Psalm 3. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Victoria, you may know mine too. We'll see. But I mean, it's just a classic one. There's probably some more recent ones I really like. So just to throw out some of my favorites, since I have the mic right now.
Okay. Okay.
You know, I love The Blessing, right? Which is that elevation worship song that's kind of been redone. It's based off of number 6. Psalm 42, which is actually one of my favorite psalms. Tori Kelly has a song based off of that. So that's a good one. There's a lot out there that are really based off scripture, but you know, a good Psalm 91. That's a good one too. But mine is Fred Hammond, No Weapon. That is my cut, man. It's probably like just one of my favorite songs of all time. It is one of the only songs I don't know if I've ever skipped when it ever came up on shuffle. You know what I mean? Like one of those songs that like just in that moment I gotta listen to. That's based off of Isaiah 54:17. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. And so yeah, I love that song. I love anytime it comes up, but also that passage. So yeah, it's probably my favorite one.
Yeah.
Fred was before his time.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Don't get me started on Fred Hammond.
Yeah, that's his guy. That's his guy,
dude.
Yes.
I could go on for a long time about plenty of Fred Hammond songs. You know, but good. Okay, cool. Thank you guys for sharing that. If you got some other ones that you think are good that you want to share with us, maybe something we haven't heard before, let us know. Put it in the chat, send us a message, something, because we'd love to be able to hear some good songs based off of scripture, right? You know those are solid, right? When it's based off the Lord's word, you know, you can trust
solid.
You can trust it. So right, well, let's jump in. We have 4 chapters a day through the book of 1 Samuel. So we'll get through 20 chapters this week. It will not complete the book of 1 Samuel. We'll have to come back next week to get through the rest of the book. But in the meantime, we at least know we can get through these first 4 books. So this is interesting. For most of what we've read so far, it's been pretty sequential, right? So to this point, we've gone from Genesis to Exodus, which kind of, you know, Exodus picks up after Joseph, you know, some years later, but after Joseph. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy all kind of happened in the same 40 years or so of Moses' life. Joshua comes after Deuteronomy, immediately following that. Judges is pretty much immediately following Joshua, and Ruth takes place somewhere in Judges, like the early part of Judges. Now we kind of get to 1 Samuel, and man, it's kind of it almost feels like it's a whole new story, right? We're not really dealing with kind of this sequential pickup right where we left off type of thing. But this begins a generation where we start to get into the kings of Israel and Judah. So it starts at 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles. These next 6 books that we're in kind of all really go together. These books of history, they give us the history of the Israelites in Judah, and ultimately a lot of that. So yeah, let's start here in chapter 1, where we get introduced to essentially the namesake of this book, why these 2 books are called Samuel. We start here with him, and there's this vow that Hannah makes. So we get introduced to his mother, who, you know, that's kind of a spoiler alert already, because there's this barren woman named Hannah, but we also just called him, you know, his mother. So we know that she's not barren forever. Talk to me a little bit about kind of what stuck out to you guys early in 1 Samuel when we deal with Hannah's vow, maybe even some of what she struggled with, or just anything that you guys thought was interesting here.
Yeah, in verse 2, when it just starts off with he had 2 wives, I was like, uh-oh, here we go again. Because, you know, it's never a good story. It wasn't like, I don't think we've ever come across a story yet where there's been 2 wives or multiple wives, and it's like, and they were the best of friends. And like, it just got wrong. Like, it's always been drama, and it's always been strife. And so you say,
watch Sister Wives? We already know this ain't gonna work.
And so I'm like, why do we keep doing this, y'all? Like, just one wife. Just keep it simple. Just take one wife for yourself.
Is that a cultural thing? Like, was that a cultural thing? Like, them having, like, 2 wives?
It was more of a, yes, it was a cultural thing in the sense that, like, in that time and in that culture, it was, I don't know, morally is not the best word, but, like, culturally accepted to have more than one wife, even if kind of commanded. It was like, don't do that. More, like, culturally in that time that was, but it was less about like, I don't know. It was more like almost in the same way of like property, right? Like the way that women were almost viewed, that it was almost like, I have lots of children, I have lots of animal, I have lots of lands, I have lots of wives, right? It's just like this status thing that was associated with more than one's wife. And so I think that's a lot of what it was. Or if the wife that I did love, as in this case, wasn't bearing me a child, I needed a child, so I had to take another wife to get the sons that I need to keep my lineage going. So it was those kind of things that often would lead to those decisions, but still frowned upon by the time said and done.
Okay.
Drama.
Yeah.
And drama, yeah.
Drama.
I don't
think I could deal with it.
Look, your wife's not sitting here, so I'm gonna be careful. You can say what you want to say.
I can say what I'm gonna say.
My wife's sitting here, so I'm gonna be careful.
Listen.
I'm gonna be honest with you.
I'm all you need.
I know for a fact Anya's a handful as it is. Okay.
I was thinking.
Okay.
I don't know what else.
Listen.
What else I can do?
Let me clean that up. It's a good handful, okay? Like,
Listen.
Oh, it's
handful of blessings.
Handful of
yes.
blessings.
But
Handful of
Let me
blessings.
hold it down for the wives. Hold on.
listen, but
We all y'all need.
yes,
okay?
yes,
And all we can handle.
yes, and all we can handle. He
All
said,
the above.
listen, two wives.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's too much.
Ooh.
Yes.
Yeah, and they already starting in verse 6 to, she provokes her, he irritates her,
Yeah.
and just, is mean to her because she's not, and I'm just like, how low? Like, how low? Let this lady live. And it's on the way to the temple that she does this, which is crazy to me.
Yeah.
It's like on your way to church.
Yes.
You over here cutting
Pushing
up.
my butt.
Yeah, starting stuff. And
That
so,
stood out to me too. That
Did
stood
it?
out to me too. And so I wonder, like, was it because he gave her like more, and he
Right.
openly expressed like, "Yo, I love her,
Right.
and you just my baby mama."
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
Like, was it like that? Was it? I wonder, was that like provoking this because you knew what a real love resided? Like,
Yeah.
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 One of those Rachel and Leah things again, right?
Yeah.
Where it is like, we clearly know that he loves her and kept giving her double portions, right? But she was just like, well, this is what I got to boast about. So, I got more kids than you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I'm glad you brought up Rachel and Leah, because that's exactly what it made me think of. And, I think it bears repeating just in case for, whatever reason we weren't. That's back in Genesis a long time ago now. But, one of the things that stuck out to me then that I even think I was reminded of here was, you still have these two people who, as you said, they're on their way to the temple. They're more focused on what the other person has than even like God, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is where their attention should be. Like, as you said, hey, you got the child. I want a child. That's what I'm grieving for and hoping for. You got the husband's love. I want the husband's love. Like, that kind of thing, or the favoritism. And I think it goes to show that ultimately it don't really matter what we have. Somebody else probably got something we still want. And until we realize that like God is ultimately who satisfies us, like, and who meets our needs, that like we will probably always be unsatisfied.
Yeah.
Right. And then it messed her up so bad that she didn't even want to like eat.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you on this journey to the temple, you so upset that you don't want to eat. Like,
Yeah.
I wonder, like deep down inside, like how did like the husband feel like trying to be like the mediator? Because like as like the head, like you're trying to get everybody on the same page. You're trying to like set like the tone in the temple. So I wonder like how was it for him going into the temple? Like, could he really like focus or like really like cover and like lead his household? Was that something that he was used to? And if so, I need to talk to him because I need to figure out how he did it, man. I need to figure out how he did it. Like,
yeah.
It's good.
No, that's really good. It's a really good thought. But I think it's interesting what you guys are bringing up, because even in all of that's going on, it was God who was in control of all of this.
right.
Like, even in verse 6, it says, because the Lord had closed her womb.
Yeah.
Like, it had nothing to do with Hannah did at all. But when you was talking about, like, her not eating, now I forget what the scripture was. It's like back in, like, Deuteronomy or something, like, when they started saying how they should go up to the festivals. I can't find it. I was trying, but one of them says that they need to go up and with their children celebrating, eating, and rejoicing. And I wonder if that's part of the reason maybe that like she wasn't eating and rejoicing because she didn't have no children.
Ooh.
Like how can I go up celebrating with my children and all that the Lord had blessed me with when I'm barren?
Yeah.
And so I wonder, I don't know. I'm gonna ask the Lord too when I get there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she again, we've talked about it. She's barren, she's sad, she's actually praying in the temple, silently, but obviously fervently, to the point that they think she's intoxicated, right?
Yeah.
In the temple, and actually were getting ready prepared to like almost kick her out and condemn her. But once it's clear that that's not what's happening, Eli, who is the priest at this time, that's who we get introduced to here, right? So we have Hannah, but we also have Eli, who is kind of a priest in Israel and a judge in Israel at this time. Once he hears her request, he just says, go in peace, right? And I don't think he even hears the request, actually. She doesn't even tell him what she's praying for. She just says she's been praying, from the depth of her anguish and resentment, which is what my translation says. And he just says, may the God of Israel grant requests made of him. And so she goes. But what I love is that in verse 18, like as soon as she hears like the man of God kind of profess, an answered prayer. I mean, she said she went on her way, she ate and no longer looked despondent. Like as soon as she knew she had the favor of God, like that the man of God spoke over her, like she just went. And, in our prayer time, Tonya recently shared this thought that I thought was just a great illustration where she was like, if somebody gives you a check, for $4,000, like you don't wait until you go cash it to rejoice. Like you rejoice as soon as you get that check, because if you know it's good, right? Like you're just excited to have it, and even before you go cash it and actually redeem the value of it. And I feel like that's how it was. It was like as soon as he spoke those words, she was like, oh, I know it will be so. Like, and I have the faith to believe that will happen. And I love that. And it just challenged me to consider if I have that same faith, that like as soon as I hear it, can I just rejoice and know, even before I actually receive, what it is that I'm praying for.
Yeah. I want to back up really quick. I think that's like the part B of verse 9. And it says, at the time Eli the priest was sitting in the chair by the doorpost of the Lord's sanctuary. And I kind of wonder, I just thought it was very ironic that her womb was closed and he was sitting by opening. And I wonder, like, was that like symbolic of, okay, well, I watched you like prevail, I watched you like come in, and even though like you were like upset, you still gave me like a version of you that was authentic. Like you let me feel everything. And because of that, like I'm gonna give you what you asked for. The symbol was like, I'm gonna open your womb because I'm like by the door of the Lord. I wondered, did that kind of like, was that like a symbolization of, well, I'm about to open this like womb for you?
That's a good thought.
Yeah.
That is. And then even in that moment though, of where they were positioned, I do love that like her response, even in her praying, was automatically, I'm going to give him back to the Lord, right? Like that's where we get her kind of confessing that she's going to like have him live as a Nazarite, right? Like right there, the no cutting of his hair and stuff we talked about a few weeks ago. But like here, she was just like, like even the opening of her heart too, right? Was just like this open hand that she had. That it wasn't like, you're gonna give me what I want and I'm gonna keep it for myself. Like she was like, he opened her womb and she opened her heart and her hands back to him. And like even like we see in chapter 2, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but even when we see chapter 2 in her song and her prayer, you see her heart was for the Lord. Like none of it was about this child. Like this entire chapter 2 prayer was about how she wanted to give back to the Lord. So I wonder if like all that openness was like you said, like a big symbolism of just this flowing of blessing in and out, and this opening of receiving.
So you are Mom Victoria, like
slow bit.
Like, and you brought up a point where like she willingly gave the child back to God. Like I don't have kids, and if they ask me to give, well, Rallo, they can have Rallo. So Rallo's my dog. But if they ask me to give Bailey, I would be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I wonder what like the emotions like she felt like as a woman of just like saying like, yo, you gave me what you asked for, a child. Now I'm turning around and I'm gotta give this child back to you.
Yeah.
And I only get like not to jump too far ahead, but after like the nursing period was over with, she was like, okay, now you go. And I just come visit. Like, I wonder like how that felt like as a mom, like, like that's my blood, but like, and I don't even get a chance to like really raise you.
Right.
I've been waiting to like
Yeah.
to ask that. Oh, to open that can of worms with you this week.
That one's tough because I looked at our third child, Noah, who's 3, about to be 4, and that's around the time that she probably would have weaned him completely. He's around 3 years old in that culture in that day. And so I looked at Noah when I was telling this Bible story to the kids a couple of nights ago, and I said, that's like me just taking Noah to the church and just leaving him there. And I don't know how she did it.
Did you cry when you told the story?
Almost, because I'm pregnant with all these hormones. Like, I was on the verge of tears, yo.
I'm about to cry
But it was
right now.
Bible story times. I have to keep it together for the rest of the kids. Like, I had to keep it together. But I was like, I don't know how she did that without knowing that the God will give her other kids. And even if he did give her other kids, that one's still my child. Like,
That's the first.
I'm still missing a child. It does not matter how many more come after that. Like, my child is my child, which I do love to see that she gave him a robe like every year. And I know we're in chapter 2 now, but that she made.
It's a story. We're gonna tell the story.
And she made him.
It wasn't written in chapters.
It wasn't. It sure wasn't.
That's just
But she came and gave him a robe because like her heart was still like, this is still my child. And I just wonder what that moment was like for her when she got to see him each year and see how he grew.
Yeah.
He grew and progressed. But just knowing that he was doing well probably just softened her heart. But geez, I don't know how she did. So I think that's even why the Lord chose her, right? Like, that's probably why he chose a Hannah over a Penina.
Right.
Whatever the other lady's name was. But, you know, it's probably why he chose Hannah, because her heart was for the Lord. Like, I'm going to do whatever you ask me to do, even if it means to give up my child in the way of like an Abraham.
Right.
He didn't call her Victoria.
Yeah, but I think I hear you, and you're right. Like, the exact like idea of trying to drop my child off at the church is not something I'm a fan of by any stretch of imagination. But isn't that exactly what God asked us to do?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, God does ask us to give them back to him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's probably the hardest thing about parenting. One of the hardest things about parenting is actually trusting God with my child's future. With their upbringing, with who they will become and what they will do, right? Even over my own expectations and desires for them. Like, yeah, like I said, I'm preparing for the day that one of my kids gonna come to me and, you know, tell me the Lord said whatever. And it's gonna be something that like I'm like, no. They'd be like, no, the Lord called me to Nicaragua to do mission work. I'll be like, you 17? What you talking about? Like, no, that's what he called me to do. And do I trust God? Like, do I give them to the Lord and say, Lord, if this is what you've called them to do?
Yeah.
You know? And I'm like, yeah, as much as it sounds challenging, I feel like this is exactly what God asked us to do.
Yeah.
That he's the first parent.
Yeah. But we can't forget about like the father in this story either.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, for him to support like Hannah.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Okay, if this is what you see fit, like, I support you, because it plays an emotional role on him too. Like, yo, this is like your first. So even though he didn't have your name, but like this is like your namesake. Like, this is like when people see him, they see you. Like when people see me, they see like my dad. So that's like he's missing out on things that you know, probably could like pour into him, like in like modern terms, like you teaching him how to change a tire. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like teaching your son how to change a tire or something like that. So I thought it was pretty cool that not only like was he okay with it, but they like willingly gave like a well deserved like offering to God to let them know like, okay, God, like, yo, I trust you.
Yeah, I did think that was really good. Like, even from just a marriage perspective, right? Like, this whole plan was thought up by Hannah, as far as we know, right?
Yeah.
Like, it was her prayer, it was her commitment to the Lord. This is what she promised God she would do with her son, right? This is what, you know, her conversation with Eli was. And so to come up and say, like, this is what I said, this, you know, needs to happen with this boy, for him to just like honor her vow to the Lord, right? Which, you know, we had talked about, there were laws before about like if a woman makes a vow, like as long as you don't you know, you get one chance to kind of like, you know, override it or veto it, but other than that, like you have to let it go. But still, just the fact that he did support like her in this case, like just relationship with God and like what she felt God was calling her to do. I'm like, that's a beautiful thing. Like, it doesn't have to be him hearing from the Lord. We see that constantly in scripture where like the wife hears from the Lord, and you know, the husband finds out later, and it's just like, oh, okay, cool. Like, versus, yeah, no, I ain't hear that, you know, and until the Lord and the angel come and talk to me, you know, I'm not doing that. You know what I'm saying? Kind of concept.
Yeah. So, like, I think that speaks to his relationship with God too, because this is not. I don't think it's in nowhere in the story, but I think somewhere down the line, like God may have came and like gave him that comfort and peace that to allow him to support Hannah's decision, and support it like as a unity, you know. Yeah.
Well, just to move us along a little bit, we kind of talked through just overall talk through kind of end of 1 and this beginning of 2, where Hannah's story, but ultimately Hannah's son has a purpose, right? So Hannah's son Samuel, whom we're introduced to here, right, just to kind of say the name, he has a purpose, and one of the first things that he's really honestly really charged to do is deliver some bad news. It's kind of what happens. But before we get to 3, where he has to actually say it, chapter 2 kind of introduces us to like the behavior of Eli's sons, right? So if we kind of start here at verse 12 or so, Eli's sons were just out of pocket and you know, kind of doing some pretty disrespectful things when it came to the offerings that were supposed to go to the God. Anything that just jumped out to you guys here, kind of starting at verse 12 of chapter 2, taking that to the end of 2, anything that you guys thought was interesting as we got introduced to what Eli's family was doing?
I think the detail that they took to like explain how it was supposed to be done and how Eli's sons were doing it, like it gave you understanding of, okay, like protocol in a sense. So now it whenever it says down, it jumps down to verse 18, where it says, now Samuel was ministering with the favor of the Lord. It makes it make sense now, because you're like, okay, well, how can he be so young and minister like with the favor when these guys supposed to be like setting the example for him? Like, how does he know what that example was? So that means at some point in time, if he's living with these guys, he's living with Eli, they had to be doing it the correct way. That like really stood out to me, that like, you know, how eventually they start like taking the fat, and instead of like burning it, they started taking it for themselves. I underlined it, a part of verse 14 where it said he would jab into the bison kettle. I don't even know how to pronounce that word. That's what the Bible make you question whether you can read or not. Or pot. Everything that the fort would bring up, the priest would take for himself. This is how they used to treat all the Israelites who came to the Shiloh. I think that's how you pronounce that. So it's like, it makes it seem like now they're treating like the people bad. And so at one point in time, there had to be a time to where they were treating them like they're supposed to. So in order for Samuel to know what it looks like to minister with the favor of God, it kind of stood out to me.
I think it was really hard for me to just even watch what they were doing or listen to it after going through like Leviticus and how stern and strict the Lord was, which made me even think like, Lord, why did you let them hang around so long, right? Like with before with Aaron's sons. Now I know that was like with fire, right? It wasn't just the sacrifices, but they used the unauthorized fire. Like he just took them out straight up, like right then and there. But it's like he gave them time, right, to like change their ways. And even though Eli wasn't pressing them, he just asked them like, what's happening, why y'all doing this? Like he wasn't really pressing. Like it gave them opportunity. I'm like, Lord, why are you showing them so much grace? Because they over here defiling your sacrifices. Like and then at one point it even says that they were like on verse 22 that they were sleeping with the women who were serving at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And so I was just like, so y'all just doing all the things at this point. And so I wonder why Eli didn't put more of a fight, for one, and I wonder why the Lord gave him so much grace.
It made me think that like sometimes we have grace because of other people in our lives. And maybe because Eli was pouring into Samuel, maybe he gave, this is just my train of thought, that maybe he gave his sons grace, but he knew like once he kind of got Samuel to that point of being mature enough to handle himself, okay, now it's time for me to deal with you. Because I don't think Aaron's son, or I don't think like Aaron's sons were like pouring into anybody, or Aaron was pouring into anybody at that time. So maybe God didn't have a use for them.
He had two other sons.
Yeah, he also had
two other sons right behind him.
Yeah. And it also could have just been, I mean, that was much earlier in a lot of these commands. God might have just been trying to like set a bar and set a standard. But God chooses whom to judge, or he judges all, but like what the consequences will be. But I mean, I did think like there was some like modern reflection, right? When I just think about, okay, people, because like to me their big sin was like just this lack of reverence for the sanctuary, but that which is sanctified, right, and which is holy and which is righteous. And I think there's so much we could like really learn from that, particularly in the way that we deal with church, or deal with I mean, a lot of different things, our Bibles, whatever, right? These things that we got to consider holy. Like, do we actually have reverence for some of that? But I thought what was interesting was that, and we're going to see this again later in 1 Samuel, I just thought it was interesting that I feel like God was like positioning the successor before like even bringing up the issue, if that makes sense, right? Like I feel like he brought Samuel under Eli to prepare him for the inevitable transition. Like to your point, you think like Samuel thinks he's like raising up Eli, and God's like, no, I'm actually raising up Eli because your family can't do this anymore. Right. Like, and whereas in general families tended to kind of keep that lineage going and those operations going, it was like, all right, if it can't do there, then I'm gonna raise up somebody else to come and take your place. And again, we end up seeing that with like David and Saul, for instance, right? Where it's just like, all right, you're not doing your job. Let me go get somebody else that I know I can trust to do this job. Right. And I'm actually just gonna bring them in and get them ready to transition and take over. And so like I just love it. Like he didn't need he wasn't caught off guard, right? God wasn't, he already had a backup plan in place. And I just love that about him, that he's 3 steps ahead, right? Like I'm already raising up Samuel for this role that Eli, you can no longer fulfill, and your sons can't either. Which is crazy because Samuel's not even in the tribe of Levites or Aaron's descendants. He's an Ephraimite, right? Like he's from the tribe of Ephraim. So I think it's just even interesting that they say that the boy was clothed in verse 18 in a linen ephod, and I'm like, wait a minute, he got an ephod on? Like, listen. And he's not even a lineage of the Levites. Like, he's over here serving in the temple. So I think the Lord really was like, there ain't nobody else right here that I can use. Yep. Let me go and choose for myself. Yeah. A Nazarite, right? Somebody I'm going to make holy. Yes, a Nazarite, right. That can do this.
That seemed to be like a reoccurring theme in the Bible.
Absolutely.
Like, and it blows me away because like if you really take a look like closely at like today's time, that seemed to be like the reoccurring theme too. Like if you can't do what I've asked or charged of you, I will place somebody under you in which you think you're like teaching, but in reality, I'm putting them close enough to what's going on so they can see what to do and what not to do, how you conduct yourself, how you don't conduct yourself. So when that transition takes like physically, like it's not a burden to the person who is like getting that mantle.
Yeah.
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 That's it.
But so like you said, so this is happening. Eli is warned about his son's death. Essentially, you didn't do it. Man of God comes to him and says, "Your son's gonna die. That's how this gonna happen." And then chapter 3 comes, and as we said, God has been grooming Samuel, so He actually calls him here in chapter 3, and essentially gives him, like, speaks to him for the very first time. Anything that you guys thought was interesting here in chapter 3? It was a little shorter chapter compared to some of the others, but yeah, before we kind of wrap up today's conversation with 3 and 4. But yeah, anything here in chapter 3 you guys thought was interesting?
That this was like the first time, all this time that like Samuel has been in the temple, this is the first time that God like spoke to him directly.
Yeah.
And so for me, that hit home because it was like, okay, now God is like, I don't want you to rely on Eli for what my voice sounds like, because Eli's not going to be here all the time. I need to start speaking directly to you. And then it made me think about like how sometimes we get so conditioned to the person's voice that like we hear God from, to where we don't even know what God sounds like to ourselves. So when it's time for us to lead, or when it's time for us to do whatever we got to do, we're so confused. And so for Eli to say, yo, that ain't me calling you. That ain't me calling you. If he call you again, it's God. Like that was it. That spoke to me, because I feel like that's where I'm at right now. It's like, okay, for so long I've known the voice of God through others, but now like hearing the voice of God for myself, it hits different.
Yeah.
And it gives me confidence of like, okay, yo, God he do really speak. Like whatever he puts like reveals to me, yo, it is real, because he's speaking directly to me. Like he wants to have a relationship with me, not like a third party.
Yeah.
Not like a third party relationship no more.
Yeah, you know, I think that's really good, because I mean, honestly, 1 Samuel 3 is a passage I often go to when it comes to like hearing from God. It is a passage that like I tend to go to first, but like as you said, there has to be that point in our relationship with God where we know what his voice sounds like. And it's dangerous, just, you know, candidly, right, to always depend on someone, because in this case, at least he still had Eli to give him context that it was God's voice. But as we will find out shortly, Eli's not here for long, right?
Yeah.
And so what would have happened if Eli was no longer here? Would he have been able to distinguish God's voice? So it is important that in our walk with God that we are intentional about trying to discover the voice of God and what it sounds like, to the best of our ability.
Yeah, but I think it's really interesting too that like it made note in the very first verse of chapter 3 that the word of God was rare in those days, and that there were no frequent visions.
Yeah.
So I feel like it set the tone of like, this isn't something that usually happens.
Right.
Like this is something new, because even if we look at chapter 2 and verse 27, God didn't come to Eli himself. It was like there came a man of God to Eli.
Yeah.
And so like God ended up using someone else to send to Eli, and I wonder how much God was even speaking to Eli directly.
Right.
Because of all that's going on in his household. But I do love that like Eli had enough wisdom to be like, yeah, hold on, this might be God. Like, like I heard about these stories before. You know, like it might not, I'll be talking to me all the time, but I heard this could be how the Lord speaks, because remember that at one point the Lord also told Aaron and Moses that like Aaron and the priests were not going to hear God the way that God spoke to Moses. Right? He's like, he's not going to speak. I'm not going to speak face to face. You're going to use the Urim and you're going to use the Thummim, and that's going to how you'll be able to determine what you want me, like what I want you guys to do.
Yeah.
So that's probably what Eli was used to doing. He's just using the little tactics that the Lord had given him to determine his will. But even just this whole hearing from the Lord is interesting. But I love, I'm just going to jump down to verse 19 of chapter 3. Now this is one of my favorite verses here, like of all time. It says, and Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. And I'm like, wow, like he did chose a person, like God chose Samuel, and Samuel didn't let any of God's words like go to waste. And I'm like, how many times has the Lord spoken to me or said something to me, or I felt like the Holy Spirit put something in my spirit, or I had like a dream, and then I forget it. Or I don't write it down, or I'm like, I don't know if I feel like doing that, Lord, you know. So like, but here Samuel, like, he didn't let a single word get by, like, and I just love that.
Yeah.
That he chose the right one.
Made me kind of wonder, like, for him to be that, like, that hung on to like God's word. Did he see that in Eli? Because essentially, like, Eli is like his like spiritual father in a sense, and so it's like, I think like we pick up characteristics of like whoever we look up to hear God from. So like if we see someone that is disciplined and like hang on to God, have strong faith, then eventually like we're striving to have that same faith. And then like when it jumps down to 13 and when it says you should tell him that I'm about to judge his house forever because of the sins that he knew about, like imagine going to tell someone that like has taught you the way of God, that has taught you like how to hear God, and you finally hear God for yourself, and now you got to go deliver that dagger. And you've been hanging on to every single word and everything that you see has like come to pass, and now I got to see like the person who has taught me who God is essentially has to face the music of God. Like I wonder like the emotions that he felt like in that moment, like
Yeah. I mean, I think I can imagine a couple of things you said. Like I can imagine his mom probably also played a part in that, right? That like every time she visited, she probably just reminded him of like who he was and when he was like 4, like why he was, you know, even serving there, right? Like you're here for the Lord and your life is dedicated to serving him. Like I gave you back to him for that. And I'm sure just even her own prayers and her own fervor for the Lord is probably inspired that as well. But yeah, I did think that like it had to be hard. I mean, it says it here. He was afraid to tell Eli, right? It tells us that in verse 16. So I know, or in 15, but like I know that had to be a tough call. But I appreciate Eli's at least like perspective of like my version says in 18, you know, he responded, he is the Lord. Let him do what he thinks is good. Like, I want to know the truth. I want you to tell me what he said. Don't sugarcoat it. Tell me everything he said. And when he heard it, he didn't argue with Eli. With Samuel. He didn't try to tell Samuel, you don't know what you talk about. Listen to your elders. Like, you know, like he was like, all right, I trust the Lord spoke to you and let him do what is good, despite the fact that it's something I don't want to hear.
Only did that build his confidence. Like
I would hope so. Yeah.
Like for you to deliver a dagger and you're delivering that dagger to like someone once again that raised you, and that person like basically says, so be it, I receive it, let's roll with it.
Yeah.
And then I had another question too. When she gave him to God, like I wonder how often now, like when people have kids, I know it's like like taken like lightly now whenever we have like baby dedications, and they give it back to God. But like I wonder like how different the world would be if like people got back to doing that, like actually taking time to giving the child back to God. Like I got to witness it Sunday. Like my parents became like godparents, and they did like the whole baby dedication thing, and it's the things that are like spoken over you in that moment, like to see like those come to pass, I wonder like how much of that like ran through his mind, like when he was like walking through these moments. Oh, I remember my mom when she came to visit me saying, "You will do this." I remember Eli kind of telling me, "Oh, when you were a child, you were like dedicated to the Lord, and the Lord said you would do this."
Yeah.
So, like, I wonder did that also play into like his confidence and his boldness to profess and to hang on to like what God has told him.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder. That's good. I never thought about it in terms of like even today's modern day baby dedications and stuff. Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say the way that my version phrases verse 19 is that the Lord was with him and he fulfilled everything Samuel prophesied. And so we see that happen right here in chapter 4. He tells Eli about what's going to happen to his sons. And so in chapter 4, the ark of the Lord is stolen. And honestly, it feels like it's just this entire ruse to just fulfill the prophecy, because it's stolen. Everybody gets plagued, and ultimately his sons die as prophesied, and then Eli will as well. But what jumped out to you guys here in chapter 4 as this prophecy of Eli's family is fulfilled?
The famous question: why did the Lord let us be defeated today by the Philistines? So it's like they keep going around this tree. Why were we defeated? Well, it's a no-brainer. Well, of course we can say it's a no-brainer because like we get context of why. But like you kind of look at it and you think about today, like we may not like be in war with with the Philistines or with our neighbors, but how often like we go around and we ask God like, why did we get defeated today? But like, do we think about like what like we have done or what our leaders have done or what like prophecies like are we fulfilling in that moment? And for them to like, I guess like look to the Ark of Covenant for like protection kind of like make me think, okay, well, too often like we look at the thing that we know God to be at and God is not even there anymore, and it's too late like whenever we realize it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that like they were so focused on, it seemed like the ark being brought up, probably not as much like the Lord himself, right? Like it was this like showpiece, right? Like that they probably have in this time lost, who the Lord is in terms of how they have been acting and how they've been living and how they have been like sacrificing themselves for the Lord and stuff. And so it was kind of like their hearts weren't even for the Lord, but it was kind of like this ark was a showpiece of like, oh, we heard in the past when we bring the ark, we're supposed to win.
Right.
But it wasn't really just about the Ark of Covenant. It was about their relationship with the Lord and calling on the Lord and asking him to save them as their people so that nations around them would know who the real true God was. And so I think it's interesting though that like at this point though, God has this reputation that he has made amongst even the Philistines here, because they were scared because they knew about what happened to the Egyptians and in the wilderness and stuff. And so like they were scared for good reasons. But I think the Lord he wanted their hearts. Like he didn't want to just be this showpiece. Like he wanted them to be his people.
Yeah.
And then the amount of Israelites that were killed, if I read it correctly in verse 10. So the Philistines fought, Israel was defeated, they all ran home. The slaughter was very great. 30,000 foot soldiers from Israel fell in battle. That's a lot.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Like, I didn't know, we don't have context to know, okay, I mean, we can assume just because we just read Judges, so we know the Israelites was wilding at this time, right? Like, they weren't really living for the Lord, right? So this also could have just been judgment on the Israelites in the process of this.
Right.
But we don't get that part of the story in this one. So it almost feels like 29,998 collateral damage. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Because ultimately we know Hophni and Phineas are the two that, like, is prophesied will die. But it's not like, I mean, it's one of two things. It's either judgment on all of Israel, right? Or it's collateral damage, which speaks to the consequence of poor leadership, right? And like what happens when leaders fall. Because when leaders fall, like, we all fall. Like, there's a lot of people that go with them, and a lot of people that are part of that, because ultimately, again, they are leaders. They are priests and Levites in the house of God. And so, like, yeah, when they fail and led Israel astray with their actions, like, Israel has to go with them. Like, and so, yeah, I think you see that damage and how widespread it became.
Yeah. And I think the grief is great. Like, that it even trickled to Eli, who fell backwards and broke his neck, and then also to the wife of Phineas, right? Who died during childbirth. Like, the Lord's, like he said, he was going to fulfill what he said he was going to fulfill. Right. You didn't even have to be at the battle. Like, I'm gonna find a way to take you out.
Yeah.
But it's crazy that, like, Eli wasn't so much concerned about, like, his sons.
Yeah.
It was like to me, it made it seem like he was more concerned about, like, God's presence in a sense.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Well, we have a lot more to get to this week, but that kind of brings the conclusion of today's conversation. We'll pick up on chapter 5 tomorrow, talk more about Samuel and kind of what he oversaw and saw happen in the land of Israel at this time. But yeah, appreciate you guys joining us. Look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow. But until then, take care.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible.